When the most ruthless boss in the Boston syndicate was forced by a dying wish to marry his best friend's estranged, heavily overweight cousin, he thought it was a sick joke. He expected a burdensome, embarrassing wife. What he actually got was a woman who would dismantle his entire world. Dominic Castellano stared at the blood pooling on the cold concrete of the South Boston warehouse. It wasn't his blood. It belonged to Tommy Lombardi, his underboss, his oldest friend, and the man who had just taken 2 bullets to the chest, meant for Dominic. Dom. Tommy choked out crimson bubbling at the corner of his mouth. His fingers clawed weakly at Dominic's tailored suit jacket. Listen to me. Save your strength, Tommy. The medic is 2 minutes out. Dominic lied, his voice tight. He had ordered hits, tortured informants, and burned rival businesses to the ground, without his pulse ever elevating. But watching Tommy bleed out was tearing a hole in his chest. I'm done, Dom. We both know it. Tommy gasped, his grip tightening with a sudden, desperate strength. The Morettis. They aren't going to stop. And when I'm gone, the blood debt falls to my only blood. Dominic's brow furrowed. Your cousin, the one in Chicago. Chloe. Tommy whispered, his eyes widening with sheer panic. The Morettis will skin her alive to settle my debts. You have to protect her. The only way she's safe from a syndicate hit is if she's family. Castellano family. Dominic froze. Syndicate law was absolute. A boss's wife was untouchable. Harming her meant an automatic sanctioned war by the Commission. Tommy, no. I can put guards on her. I can hide her. They'll find her. Tommy coughed violently, a terrifying rattle filling his lungs. Swear to me, Dom. Marry her. Make her a Castellano. Swear on my soul. I swear it, Dominic said hoarsely. Tommy's grip went slack. The warehouse fell dead silent, save for the distant wail of sirens. Dominic stood up, wiping his friend's blood from his hands, bound to a promise that would upend his meticulously controlled life. 1 week later, the reading of the will took place in the mahogany-paneled office of Richard Klein, the syndicate's top lawyer. Dominic sat in a leather armchair, his face an emotionless mask, waiting for the girl Tommy had died to protect. He had never met Chloe Jenkins. He knew only that she was a civilian, a data analyst, and completely ignorant of Tommy's life in the mob. When the heavy oak door opened, Dominic's jaw tightened. Chloe Jenkins was not what he expected. In his world, women were currency, sleek, impeccably styled, and razor-thin. They were ornaments meant to display a man's wealth and power. Chloe was none of those things. She was a large, heavily overweight woman, easily carrying 250 pounds on her 5'5" frame. She wore a simple, unstylish black dress that clung awkwardly to her wide hips and thick waist. Her face was round, free of makeup, and framed by frizzy, untamed brown hair. She looked entirely out of place, like a frightened civilian who had accidentally wandered into a lion's den. She clutched a worn leather handbag to her chest as a shield, her eyes darting nervously around the opulent room. Dominic felt a sudden irrational surge of anger. This was the woman Tommy had died for. This was the woman he was supposed to bind himself to for the rest of his life. A woman who would make him the laughingstock of the New England syndicates. Mr. Castellano Cross. Chloe said, her voice shaking but surprisingly clear. Mr. Klein says you have a proposition for me regarding my cousin's debts. Dominic stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't offer his hand. He looked her up and down, making no effort to hide his cold assessment. Chloe's cheeks flushed a deep, humiliated red, and she instinctively pulled her cardigan tighter around her broad shoulders. She was used to that look, the look of disgust, the look of a man silently calculating her worth and finding it less than zero. It's not a proposition, Miss Jenkins. It's a mandate, Dominic said, his voice like grinding ice. Your cousin owed the Moretti family $4 million and a pound of flesh. With him dead, they are coming for you. You don't have the money and you won't survive the alternative. Chloe's eyes widened in horror. $4 million, I make $60,000 a year. I haven't even spoken to Tommy in 5 years. The Morettis don't care, Dominic cut in ruthlessly. There is only one loophole in our world. If you are my wife, you are untouchable. So we are getting married. Today. Chloe stared at him, aghast. Married to a stranger. To a mobster. She took a step back, her chest heaving. No, absolutely not. I'll go to the police. I'll go into witness protection. Dominic let out a harsh, humorless laugh. The police work for me, Chloe, and the Morettis have men inside the marshals. If you walk out that door alone, you'll be in a body bag by midnight. I am honoring my friend's dying wish. I don't want this any more than you do. You think I want a wife like you hanging on my arm? The insult hung in the air, heavy and brutal. Chloe flinched, the words landing like physical blows, but a surprising flash of defiance sparked in her brown eyes. She lifted her chin, her double chin, prominent, but her gaze steady. I don't need your insults, Mr. Castellano. I just need to stay alive, she said coldly. Fine. Give me the papers. 3 hours later, they stood in a sterile room at City Hall. The ceremony was devoid of warmth, flowers, or family. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Dominic didn't even look at her. He simply turned on his heel and walked toward the waiting armored SUV. Chloe followed, struggling to keep up, acutely aware of the stares of Dominic's heavily armed guards. She was now Chloe Castellano, and she was stepping into a gilded, terrifying cage. The Castellano estate in Brookline was a sprawling, modern fortress of glass and steel, surrounded by high walls and armed patrols. For the first month of their marriage, it was Chloe's entire world, and she was entirely invisible in it. Dominic treated her like a piece of ugly furniture he was forced to keep for sentimental reasons. He slept in the master suite on the east wing. She was relegated to a guest room on the west wing. They never ate together. When he hosted other syndicate bosses or capos, Chloe was strictly ordered by his underboss, a sneering man named Vincent, to remain upstairs. The staff took their cues from Dominic. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, was openly dismissive, serving Chloe cold meals and rolling her eyes when Chloe asked for simple things. They saw her as a fat, useless civilian who had somehow trapped their powerful boss. Chloe spent her days crying in her room, binging on whatever snacks she could smuggle upstairs, hating herself and her body more than ever. But grief and self-pity are exhausting, and Chloe was at her core a survivor. In her old life, she had been a brilliant data analyst. She had a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos. Bored out of her mind and desperate for control, she started observing. She noticed the shift changes of the guards. She mapped the delivery schedules of the estate. She observed Vincent's nervous tics whenever he met with Dominic's accountants. The real shift happened on a rainy Tuesday. A package arrived for Chloe, forwarded from her old Chicago apartment. It was a box of cheap, stale chocolates, Tommy's favorite gag gift to her when they were kids. Mrs. Gable handed it to her with a look of pure contempt. More sweets, Mrs. Castellano. Mind the upholstery. Chloe ignored her and took the box to her room. When she opened it, she found the chocolates, but underneath the plastic tray taped to the cardboard was a small encrypted USB drive and a handwritten note. Chloe, if you're reading this, I'm dead. I'm sorry for dragging you into this. Dom thinks I died a hero, but I've been stealing from him and the Morettis for years. The proof, the ledgers and the offshore accounts are on this drive. Use it to buy your freedom. Don't trust Vincent. Tommy. Chloe's heart slammed against her ribs. Tommy hadn't just been a loyal soldier who caught a bad break. He was a rat and a thief, and he had made her the sole keeper of the most dangerous secrets in the Boston underworld. She immediately plugged the drive into a laptop. It was heavily encrypted, but whoever Tommy had hired to build the firewall was lazy. It took Chloe 3 hours of coding to break through. When the spreadsheets populated, she gasped. Tommy had siphoned over $20 million. But worse, the ledgers proved that Dominic's underboss Vincent was helping Tommy do it, and they were framing the Moretti family to start a war. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door to her suite flew open without a knock. Dominic stood in the doorway, smelling of scotch and expensive cigars. He looked exhausted. His tie loosened a dark bruise forming on his jawline. He paused, surprised to see her awake at 2 a.m., surrounded by glowing monitors. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice slurring slightly. Chloe slammed her laptop shut. "Nothing, just browsing. Don't you know how to knock?" Dominic scoffed, walking into her room and leaning against her dresser. "It's my house. I don't knock." He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. She was wearing an oversized grey sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair pulled into a messy bun. He sneered. "Tommy died for you. I sacrificed my reputation for you, and you just sit up here eating and playing on a computer while my men are dying in the streets, fighting the Morettis." The sheer arrogant cruelty of his words snapped something inside Chloe. The fear evaporated, replaced by a white-hot fury. She stood up. She was shorter than him, wider than him, and completely unarmed, but she didn't back down. "Your men are dying because you're a blind, arrogant fool, Dominic." Dominic stiffened his eyes, flashing dangerously. "Excuse me. You walk around here like a king looking down on me, because I don't fit into your perfect, tailored little world." Chloe fired back, her voice ringing with authority. "You think I'm just a fat, stupid burden. But while you're out there, starting a war over a blood debt, you don't even realize your own house is burning down from the inside." In a flash, Dominic crossed the room and grabbed her arm, his grip like a steel vice. "Watch your mouth, Chloe. You have no idea what you're talking about. I know that your offshore accounts in the Caymans have been bleeding 3% every quarter for the last 2 years, she said, staring dead into his dark, furious eyes. I know that the Morettis didn't hit your shipments at the docks last week because the shipment was never on the boats. It was diverted by your own people. And I know that your trusted underboss, Vincent, is driving a Ferrari on a capo's salary." Dominic froze. The anger in his face was instantly replaced by a cold, sharp shock. He released her arm, stepping back. "How do you know about the Caymans?" he whispered. "No one knows those routing numbers but me and Tommy," Chloe finished quietly. She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward him. Dominic leaned in his eyes, tracking the meticulously organized data, the undeniable proof of betrayal by the friend he had mourned and the underboss he trusted. He looked up from the screen, staring at his wife as if seeing her for the very first time. The fat, clumsy civilian he had despised was suddenly the most dangerous person in the room. "Who else has seen this?" Dominic asked, his voice deathly quiet. "Just me," Chloe said. "But we have a problem, Dominic. If Vincent knows Tommy sent this to me before he died." Before she could finish her sentence, the estate's emergency alarms began to shriek, a deafening wail that rattled the glass windows. Dominic's radio crackled to life on his belt. "Boss, we're under heavy fire at the front gates. It's not the Morettis. It's Vincent's crew. They've breached the perimeter." Dominic drew his weapon, his eyes locking onto Chloe's. The disgust was gone. In its place was something entirely new respect. "Get your laptop," he ordered. "We need to run." Gunfire shattered the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master suite, raining tempered glass over the Persian rugs. Dominic didn't hesitate. He lunged across the room, his large frame tackling Chloe to the floor, just as a barrage of automatic weapon fire shredded the drywall where she had been standing seconds before. "Stay down," Dominic roared over the deafening noise. He drew a sleek black Glock 19 from his shoulder holster, his eyes completely devoid of the panic that was currently seizing Chloe's chest. He grabbed her heavy laptop with one hand and her thick upper arm with the other, hauling her to her feet. "We're leaving. Now." They moved through the sprawling, dark hallways of the Brookline estate. The house was a war zone. Chloe, barefoot in her oversized sweatpants, struggled to keep up with Dominic's long, tactical strides. Her lungs burned, and her heavy thighs chafed with every hurried step, but the sheer terror of the invading men kept her moving. Dominic led her down to the wine cellar, bypassing the racks of vintage Bordeaux to press a sequence into a hidden keypad behind a stone pillar. A heavy steel door hissed open, revealing a damp concrete tunnel. "Move!" he ordered, shoving her inside just as the cellar doors above them burst open. Dominic returned fire, dropping 2 of Vincent's men before sealing the heavy vault door shut. The silence in the tunnel was sudden and absolute, save for their ragged breathing. It was then that Chloe noticed the dark, wet stain spreading across the crisp white fabric of Dominic's dress shirt just below his ribs. "You're shot!" She gasped, her hands trembling. "It's a through and through." Grazed the oblique, he grunted, though his face was pale in the dim emergency lighting. "Keep walking. This tunnel dumps out near the muddy river. I have a burner car parked 2 blocks away." They emerged into the biting chill of the Boston night. The burner car was an unassuming, rusted 10-year-old Subaru Outback, a stark contrast to Dominic's usual fleet of armored Escalades. Chloe took the wheel, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, while Dominic slumped against the passenger window, clutching his bleeding side. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice shaking as she merged onto the deserted street, keeping her headlights off until they were a mile away. "We can't go to any of your properties. Vincent will know about them." "Take us to Southie." Dominic rasped, his eyes closed. "Corner of Dorchester and West 4th. There's a walk up above an old hardware store. The lease is under a shell corporation, Beacon Hill Holdings. Only Tommy knew about it." A pang of grief hit Chloe at her cousin's name, but she shoved it down. She navigated the narrow, winding streets of South Boston, finally parking in a dark alley behind the abandoned hardware store. She helped Dominic up the 3 flights of creaking wooden stairs, his heavy, muscular weight leaning heavily against her soft, wide frame. The apartment was dusty, smelling of old pine and stale air. It was a single room with a rusted kitchenette and a sagging mattress. Chloe lowered Dominic onto the bed, ignoring the blood soaking into the yellowed mattress ticking. "I need to stop the bleeding," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She ran to the bathroom, finding a dusty first aid kit under the sink. When she returned, Dominic had managed to strip off his suit jacket and unbutton his ruined shirt. His torso was a landscape of hard muscle and old scars, contrasted sharply by the fresh, weeping bullet graze on his side. Chloe knelt beside the bed. She was acutely aware of her own appearance, disheveled, sweaty, her stomach rolling over the waistband of her sweatpants. For a month, this man had looked at her with nothing but disdain for her size. Now his life was quite literally in her plump, capable hands. She cleaned the wound with iodine, her touch gentle but firm. Dominic flinched, his jaw clenched, but his dark eyes never left her face. "You didn't panic," he said, quietly, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "I analyze data for a living. Chloe replied carefully, taping a thick gauze pad over the wound. Panic is a useless metric. It doesn't solve the problem. Dominic watched her hands. They weren't the manicured, skeletal hands of the women he usually kept company with. They were soft, dimpled, and incredibly steady. He looked up at her face. Without the harsh lighting of his mansion, and stripped of his own blinding arrogance, he saw her differently. Her round face was flushed, her dark eyes fierce and intelligent. She wasn't an ornament. She was a fortress. I was wrong about you, Dominic said, the admission costing him every ounce of his stubborn pride. I looked at you and saw a liability, a civilian, a weakness Tommy forced on me. Chloe paused, her hands resting on her thick thighs. She met his gaze squarely. And what do you see now? Dominic reached out his large, calloused hand, gently tracing the curve of her soft jawline, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. The touch sent a violent shiver down Chloe's spine. I see the only person in the world who hasn't lied to me. I see a woman who saved my life. He pulled his hand back, the moment hanging heavy, and charged between them, crackling with an unexpected raw tension. But survival came first. Vincent is going to consolidate power, Dominic said, forcing his mind back to the war. He'll reach out to Don Salvatore of the Moretti family by sunrise, offering my head to settle Tommy's debt and secure his place as the new boss of Boston. Chloe stood up, wiping her hands on a towel, her mind already shifting gears. She walked over to the small table and opened her laptop, plugging it into the wall. Then we don't let him get to sunrise with a dime to his name. For the next 4 hours, the dingy apartment became a war room. Chloe's fingers flew across the keyboard lines of code, reflecting in her dark eyes. Dominic sat beside her, drinking cheap whiskey from a dusty glass, mesmerized by her sheer brilliance. Tommy was siphoning the money, but Vincent was laundering it, Chloe explained, pointing a slightly chubby finger at the screen. He's been routing the stolen syndicate funds through a series of shell companies, but look here, he made a fatal error. He's using a server node hosted by JP Morgan Chase down on Congress Street to bundle the offshore transfers. It's protected by standard AES 256 encryption, which is tough, but he used the same administrative backdoor for all 12 accounts. Can you get in? Dominic asked, leaning closer. The scent of his spicy cologne and the metallic tang of blood mixed in the air, making Chloe's pulse race. I'm already in, she said, a wicked, triumphant smile spreading across her round face. Vincent has $32 million sitting in a holding account in the Caymans, waiting to be dispersed to his loyal capos at 8 a.m. today to fund his coup. I am going to reroute every single penny of it. Where? To the Moretti family, Chloe said, looking at Dominic. We pay off Tommy's $4 million debt. We send the rest as a gift from you to Don Salvatore, along with the ledgers proving Vincent was the one stealing their shipments and framing them. Dominic stared at her, awe washing over his hardened features. In one swift digital stroke, this woman was about to bankrupt his traitorous underboss, clear her cousin's blood debt, and ally his greatest enemy to his cause. It was ruthless. It was brilliant. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Do it, Dominic ordered. At exactly 7 a.m., Chloe hit the return key. $32 million vanished from Vincent's control. An hour later, Dominic made a phone call to Don Salvatore. The conversation was brief, spoken in rapid, hushed Italian. When Dominic hung up, he looked at Chloe. Get dressed. We have a meeting at the docks. The warehouse at the edge of the Boston harbor smelled of brine and old fish. Dominic walked in his suit jacket, hiding his bandage, projecting the absolute aura of an untouchable king. But this time, he didn't leave his wife in the car. Chloe walked beside him. She wore a simple black trench coat that she had found in the safe house, belted tightly around her thick waist. She held her head high, her fear replaced by a quiet, immovable power. Don Salvatore, an aging, grey-haired mobster in a pinstripe suit, stood at the center of the warehouse, surrounded by heavily armed men. At his feet, kneeling on the wet concrete, was Vincent. The underboss looked battered, his face bruised, and his eyes wide with panic. "Dominic!" Salvatore greeted his voice, echoing in the cavernous space. "I received your generous wire transfer, and the ledgers. It seems we have both been played by a very greedy dog." "He was my dog, Salvatore. The mess is mine to clean up," Dominic said coldly. Vincent looked up, spotting Chloe, his face contorting with rage. You fat bitch, you ruined everything," he spat, struggling against the men holding him down. "She's a civilian, Dom. She hacked my accounts. Are you really going to let this pig dictate syndicate business?" The warehouse went dead silent. Dominic didn't yell. He didn't rush forward. He simply pulled his Glock 19 from his holster, walked up to Vincent, and pressed the barrel directly against the center of the man's forehead. "You will address her as Mrs. Castellano," Dominic whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, lethal calm. "She is my wife. She is family, and she possesses more loyalty and intelligence in her little finger than you ever had in your entire pathetic life." Dominic pulled the trigger. The loud crack echoed through the warehouse. Vincent slumped to the floor, dead before he hit the concrete. Don Salvatore merely nodded in approval. The debt was settled. The traitor was dead. The Castellano Empire was secure. Dominic turned around and walked back to Chloe. He didn't look at the body. He looked only at her. In front of the boss of the Moretti family, in front of his own remaining loyal soldiers, Dominic took Chloe's soft, plump hand in his and lifted it to his lips, kissing her knuckles with absolute reverence. It was a public declaration of her status. She was untouchable. She was his equal. That night they returned to a secured penthouse in the Back Bay, the Brookline estate abandoned to the forensic teams. The adrenaline of the day finally faded, leaving the penthouse quiet and intimately still. Chloe stood in the center of the massive bedroom, looking out at the glittering Boston skyline. She felt the heavy warmth of Dominic stepping up behind her. His large hands settled on her wide hips, pulling her back flush against his chest. "I never wanted this life," she whispered, leaning back into him. "I know," Dominic murmured, burying his face in the crook of her neck, his breath hot against her skin. "But you were made for it, Chloe. You were made for me." He turned her around in his arms. There was no hesitation, no judgment in his eyes, only a burning, all-consuming hunger. He kissed her not with the cold duty of an arranged marriage, but with the desperate passion of a man who had finally found his queen. His hands roamed over her body, entirely worshipful. He pulled off her coat, his palms mapping the soft, generous curves of her stomach, the thick swell of her thighs, the heavy fullness of her breasts. Every place she had ever been taught to hate Dominic, touched as if it were sacred ground. "You are beautiful," he breathed against her lips, lifting her effortlessly, despite her size, and laying her gently back against the silk sheets. "You are perfect, exactly as you are." For the first time in her life, Chloe didn't try to hide herself. She pulled the ruthless, terrifying boss of the Boston underworld down to her, surrendering to the fire that consumed them both, finally taking her rightful place at the top of the empire. What an incredible fiery conclusion. Chloe proved that true power comes from a brilliant mind and fierce loyalty, transforming her from an overlooked civilian into the undisputed queen of the Castellano Empire. Dominic finally learned that beauty and strength come in all sizes, and their romance is absolutely scorching. If you loved this intense, twist-filled mafia love story, hit that like button right now. Share this video with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe for more real-life inspired storytelling.